I'm just waiting for it to go live everywhere. Good afternoon, it's Lee Cassidy from Tactile Technology. We've also got Pete Rosinski from Assure Technical, and we're going to talk about cybersecurity for your business. I'm just going to go through, first of all, a couple of, a slide giving you a bit of an idea what we're going to talk about today. First of all, we're going to talk about the current threat landscape. That's Pete and I. We're going to go through some of the key things, explain a few things for about 15 to 20 minutes. Then we're going to move on to certification for partnership. And this is quite important because there's been a lot of attacks, and we'll talk about it in the threat landscape, which we call supply chain attacks. So people will actually look at the target they want to get to, and they'll actually find what they believe is a softer target that's connected to them, and they'll actually work their way through the supply chain into their deemed target. And what a lot of organizations are doing now is wanting to get some proof from anybody who wants to partner with them, either as a customer or a supplier, that they've actually done some work around cybersecurity to make sure these kind of supply chain attacks don't affect them. So that's one area we're going to talk about, and Pete's going to go through some of the key areas around certification for partnership, so you can prove to your customers, prove to your suppliers, what you've done to actually protect your business. I'm going to talk about passive and active threat protection because there's quite a big difference between the two. Active threat protection's been around a little while, but not many businesses are using it at the moment. Majority of them are using more passive, and we'll talk about the difference. And then at the end, whatever time we've got left, we're going to do some question answers to make sure that anybody's thoughts that come out from the session, can be answered as we get to that point. So make sure if you're on the hopping, you put in the chat any question you've got. If you're actually watching this live on LinkedIn, just put a comment and we'll add anything that we find useful into the conversation at that point. So first of all, we're going to talk about the current threat. So one thing that we've seen recently, and you can see this through the National Cybersecurity Centre's news feeds, is ransomware as a service attack. So there's a lot of organizations now that are effectively hacker groups or providing the infrastructure to do ransomware attacks and effectively renting that infrastructure out to other hackers. So that's becoming a big problem. So it's making it a lot easier for people to get into this state and be able to ransomware people. Previously, what they'd have to do is go through all the work of actually creating the resources to do it, getting the right software, finding the right targets and going after them. Now it's becoming as easy as getting an accounting package like Xero or QuickBooks online, going and renting some capacity, and you can start doing some ransomware attacks. So it is changing the landscape quite a bit. Another one that we're seeing a lot of is email thread hijacking. And this is where they actually will try and get onto your machine. They'll actually take control of your user account within Office 365 or whatever email platform you've got. And they'll actually look through all the email threads you've had with people recently and find one that looks like it's going to be a viable one, depending on what they're trying to achieve. So maybe they just want to actually do some kind of lateral movement and get onto another machine within the organization. So effectively an internal spearfishing phishing attack, but using an email thread. So a conversation that's been had between two individuals already. And it's much harder then for the individual to identify that it's actually a threat, because it just looks like it's part of the conversation they've been having with Bill or Fred or Gail. It's just part of that email thread, and this has started to happen over the last 2 or 3 months, this type of attack. So it's getting very, very sophisticated. Another one is MFA bombing. So MFA is where we do multi-form factor authentication. So usually it's some kind of code that you can either be sent to put in, or you're going to generate on a little authentication piece. But there's a lot of systems now that come up with a quick approval. So a number of things like Okta and things would actually pop up and say, is this you? Or you want to approve this. So what the hackers are doing now is they're sending multiple requests to people continually, to the point where they get frustrated with receiving these pop-up requests on their authentication app, and eventually they say approve, just to shut it up effectively. But that gets them straight in because they've already got the credentials. It's just trying to get past that multi-form factor authentication to get in there. So really, a bit of an issue there. Another one is more sophisticated spear phishing strategies. So spear phishing, just to tell you this, between phishing and spear phishing. Phishing is sending out thousands of emails, which could be looking like requests for a password reset, or some kind of attachment, such as an invoice or a delivery note that can be some kind of malware. But spear phishing is where you're actually focusing on an individual or a small group of individuals. So it's really tailored to those people. These can also be used in this email threat hijacking as well. So actually looking at the individual you want to target, depending on what they're going to do, because it could be, they're looking to try and get some malware into that particular site, but it could be that they're actually looking to do some kind of business fraudulent transaction. So trying to get someone to make a payment for an invoice to a fake account. Well, it's a real account, but it's not the real account that it should be paid to, and get some money paid. So these are the kind of things that happen at the moment. Also, there's a lot of problems where people aren't actually, there's a large volume of people of credentials being stolen as well. Some of these are through social engineering. So, even telephone calls to ask for information, lots of things on social media, asking questions that would be used for password resets. So, but also a lot of phishing attacks as well. The majority of attacks we're seeing at the moment are actually phishing attacks to actually start it, or spear phishing attacks. So over 55% of any attack starts with that form of attack. There are still quite a lot of operating system vulnerabilities out there. So Microsoft are continually on their Patch Tuesday patching a variety of different components, and there seems to be quite a lot coming out there at the moment. Similarly with some of the other operating systems such as Linux and even the Mac operating system as well has some vulnerabilities there, and they're being identified and patched slowly. A lot of times though, it's actually got to be found first before it can be patched. And some of the hackers with their zero-day exploits within the operating system have found a way in first, and it sort of depends on the dwell time. So when they've actually identified that vulnerability and utilized it, and then it's been seen by either some technology or people, that we actually can see that there's an issue and it can be worked on to get it secured. But one of the other issues is a lot of organizations are still not patching as regularly as they could be. They need to be, going through, and especially things like security and critical patches, they need to be applied as soon as possible to make sure that your systems are as free from vulnerability as possible. There are also quite a lot of poorly secure cloud environments. There seems to be this attitude when people are going to Azure, Google Cloud Platform, and to Amazon Web Services, that it's naturally secure. It is not naturally secure. It's got some basic levels of security, but what you need to do is look at what you're actually running there and how you can protect it the best way you can. Within the Microsoft Azure platform, there's Sentinel, and Sentinel can be configured to do a lot of the security and alert management pieces for that environment, but not many people know how to utilize it. And that's becoming a challenge because people are starting to spin up workloads in these cloud environments, but they're not getting the level of security they should. They need to be speaking to some security professionals to deal with that. Also, a lot of post-attack investigations are not being completed. And one of the key things I was discussing, one of the key things about doing security analytics when there's an event, is you need to know how it's happened. Is it because there's a vulnerability in the operating system? Is it because there's a vulnerability within a particular application? Is it the end user has downloaded something that they believe was a piece of free software, but it was actually malware? there? Have they actually been a victim of phishing or spear phishing? So if we can identify what's actually happened and how it's got there, with this post attack investigation, we can then build back in, improvements to the security. And it's quite important those things are done, but a lot of people aren't completing those activities, and it's really important. And then final thing on there is about the need for EDR rather than EPP. So I'm going to cover this a bit more later, but just to give you the abbreviations. EDR is endpoint detect and response, whereas EPP is endpoint protection. And I'll talk about it in more depth later, but EPP is your traditional antivirus with maybe a personal firewall on a PC or a Mac. EDR actually gives you a detect capability, a bit more like having a good alarm system, CCTV on your property, so you know something's going on and you can get the blue light response in there to deal with it as quickly as possible. So that's a major differences really between EDR and EPP, and we're going to cover more off afterwards. So I've done all the talking so far, Pete. So anything you want to add to those threats? Anything you've seen, or any guidance coming out of IASME or anyone else?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I think they come in waves, don't they? These sort of the attacks, and you do see them come in a wave, and then they'll disappear off for a while. Now, I actually saw email thread hijacking for the first time in a long time yesterday. It was quite an unsophisticated attempt where they were returning an email. It was actually to me from one of my contacts, but they didn't actually have the sophistication to carry on the conversation. They just included a link, a nonsensical link, which would have taken me to a malicious site if I clicked on it or downloaded something. So yeah, it's been a while since I've seen that sort of thing. We also see the sort of spearfishing attacks from time to time, and they are getting quite good. I think because ransomware and that whole piece is now being delivered as a business and as a service, like you say on the first point, they're improving the standard of the work they're doing. They're becoming more coordinated, and they're delivering a higher quality of attack. So we're seeing things like new joiners being announced on LinkedIn, and then that's been detected, and then suddenly that new joiner has been targeted because they're fairly sort of easy target, as it were. They might not necessarily have conducted any training at that stage. They might not necessarily have feel empowered in the business to be able to report something. Yet they're going to be wanting to please their new employers, so they'll be jumping on requests very quickly. May not be really thinking about the ramifications of them. So that's another one to watch out for. OS vulnerabilities is a key tenet of the Cyber Essentials framework that we'll go on to talk about in a bit. But it goes without saying, systems should be kept up to date as much as possible, really. It's quite an easy win from a defensive point of view if you can just keep your systems updated when the updates come out. You've got the likes of Microsoft doing a lot of the hard work behind the scenes for you. So it's a little bit remiss to not do an update because you're really not helping yourself. They're the sort of main points we're seeing there at the moment. Obviously, cloud is one of those things that there's an assumption that the cloud is secure. Well, it just so happens those servers are hosted by someone else. It's exactly the same as if you're hosting in your own building. So applying the correct security controls to that is just as important as if it wasn't in the cloud. So yeah, they're the sort of common themes we're seeing on a regular basis.
And I think also with the public cloud stuff, especially if you're using some kind of public facing service, so you've built a website on there that's public facing, straight away it can be accessible. But sometimes, because you've not gone through the configuration and checked what services are operating on there, again, you could end up, someone quite easily getting onto that infrastructure. And we saw with people using things like open source technology like Log4j that people were utilizing exploiting Log4j to get into websites or using Log4j for logging capabilities. So, anything that's public facing, especially if it's in a cloud environment, you need to really look critically at it to make sure that you've got it protected as best you can.
Yeah, and a lot of this comes down to ownership and responsibility as well.
Yeah.
Who's responsible for doing that in an organization or in a business? Or have you delegated it to a provider or a supplier? And just being really clear about that on the outset as a business is absolutely vital. We do see from time to time organizations assume that their IT provider or their web developer is responsible for doing updates and hardening of the systems. Yet then the IT provider or the web developer are actually just delivering what they're being contracted to do, and it doesn't include that. So, that communication, contractual agreement, and ownership is so important.
I think it comes back to, so we're both ex-military, and I don't know if you remember the posters with the girl playing tennis, and it used to say, "Never assume, always check." Some time ago, they're not very politically correct these days, but I think there is this assumption sometimes when people ask a developer to go off and develop an application for them, that they are looking at the security side of things, and also the developer might be assuming that the client is going to look at the security side of it. So if that conversation is not had, there's a big gap there in the security, isn't there?
Yeah, and it just comes down to dotting the I's and crossing the T's, really, not assuming anything, and just almost having that sort of checklist of security around everything that you're doing. Who is responsible for this, and is it being done? Because in a lot of these cases, it's not people neglecting their duties or doing forgetting to do it. It's just falling through the cracks because it's not been allocated to anybody.
Yeah, definitely. I think another area that is a bit of a challenge for organisations, especially smaller ones, SMEs, is around incident management, because a lot of times there's this assumption it's someone else's job. So it'll be their IT company if they do have some form of breach or attack. It'll be their outsourced IT department that will actually deal with it and manage the actual incident all the way through to the end when it's hopefully been resolved and sorted. But in a lot of cases, it's not. It needs to be someone internally in the business, because they need to communicate that internally. They need to be able to communicate it with all the key people within the organisation and external, because it could be you've got links into other businesses, and you need to make sure they're aware of an attack, because it could be making them vulnerable as well.
No, it's absolutely true. And to manage an incident, you need to be intimately involved with that organization. So if you think that your IT provider is going to be managing incidents on your behalf, don't be surprised when they don't do it if you're not paying them an awful lot of money on a regular basis to cover that responsibility. It's not a cheap evolution. And then on top of that, you do need to be, like I said, fully integrated with the business. So you need to have the reach out to every member of that key member of the team and the leadership team to make changes and action various stages of that recovery and incident management. And typically that's very hard to outsource. And if you do outsource, it's going to cost you a lot of money. Just to have it on standby.
That's it. Very true. Right. So I think it's about time we moved on to the next thing. One of the things that we've seen quite a lot, and I mentioned it earlier, was this supply chain attack. And that's making it even more important that people have some kind of proof that they've actually done some work, because it's going to be difficult working with other organizations if you can't prove to them that you've got either, some basic level, at least, of cybersecurity defense in place. But also in some cases, you need to be able to prove it actually works as well. And I think that's where we come into Cyber Essentials, Cyber Essential Plus, and IASME governance. And I think it's best for you to cover these because you're the professional in this space. So if you want to give everybody a good view of Cyber Essentials and how that leads on through the stages, and then also cover off at the end any other areas of security that people could look into as well. Because I think people commonly, especially in the service world, they think of ISO 27001, but there are actually a lot of other ways you can actually, one, protect, but secondly, prove that you've protected your business, isn't there?
Absolutely. And when it comes to information governance, as long as you're actually doing it, that's the important thing. Getting a badge for that is secondary. So having potentially a bespoke information governance or information security management system that's working and effective is more important than going out and getting a badge to say you've got it. Doing the doing is the key there. So I'll talk about these areas on the slide here. I mean, we, as a founder and director of Assure Technical, we're what we call in the UK one of the UK's accredited certification bodies. So we can deliver and sign off and certify organisations to the Cyber Essentials Plus, IASME governance standards, and a number of other sort of security and information governance related certifications. So the longest standing one is, and the one that's most popular and most well known, is the Cyber Essentials scheme. It was established a number of years ago, sort of early 2012, 2014 era, as a government initiative to try and improve the baseline of cybersecurity in UK industry. Back then, cybersecurity, internet security, IT security wasn't as widely understood as it is now. So it was sort of quite trailblazing, really, and the UK trailblazed that in the world, really. I mean, a lot of companies, a lot of other countries have tried to emulate the Cyber Essentials scheme or have similar things, but they've all seemed to sort of come after the Cyber Essentials. Obviously, the US have got their own schemes, and they've sort of also, they're quite trailblazing in their own right as well. But we're talking more European countries here. The Cyber Essentials scheme, there's no black art to it. It's about getting the basics right. It's not so much focused on policy and process, which an information governance system would be. It's more about the technical controls, and are you actually doing them? Do you have strong passwords in use? Are you updating your operating systems and your software? You know, are the systems configured in a secure manner? So if an event occurred, it wouldn't be necessarily widespread throughout the network. It would be contained. So it's, you know, getting the basics right. The way it's broken down into two certifications can be a little bit confusing, but there are changes in place now, in the sense that a few years ago, most companies just achieved the Cyber Essentials standard, and the Cyber Essentials Plus was deemed as this sort of much harder to achieve, higher level. Whereas now, I think the general theme is most companies are actually aiming for the Cyber Essentials Plus level. They are totally interlinked, and it is the same scheme and it's the same standard. And I'll just describe the difference between the two now. But essentially, to achieve Cyber Essentials Plus, it's a two-stage process. You first achieve Cyber Essentials, which is a self-assessment questionnaire, which declares the scope, what you're actually certifying, you know, the number of devices, what sort of those devices they are, etc. The size of your business.
It's not just filling it in and then leaving it. There'll be some to and fro in just validating some of the answers as well, aren't there?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it is quite an involved process to go through it and complete the assessment. So it's not, you know, I get this quite a lot when people first engage with us. They use terms like, well, it's just tick box exercise, so we'll just fling through that, and then we'll deal with the plus, which is obviously the hard one, which is absolutely not the case. You know, getting your compliance with the standard and identifying your scope in the first instance is almost singularly the most important bit. The basic Cyber Essentials is the scheme. It's the point where you comply with the controls, and is therefore singularly the most important bit. Once you've completed that and you've had that signed off by a certification body who's looked at the answers and said they're all compliant and therefore meeting the standard, you then have an opportunity to go for the Cyber Essentials Plus certification, which is essentially, it's a technical audit, where a company like ours, Assure Technical as a certification body, or any of the certification bodies that are qualified to deliver this, would come in and then do a series of tests on your systems to prove, not only to us but to yourself as a business owner, that they're working as you expect them to.
So it's a validation of what's been said.
It is, yeah. And you know, if you answer the questions accurately at the basic level, Cyber Essentials basic level, in theory, if they're compliant at that stage, you should sail through the plus audit, in theory, in a perfect world. But what we do actually find,
unless somebody's lied.
Well, it's not just
Yeah,
not just about that,
then
actually.
again, it's how you're looking at it. If you want to be secure and prove to other people you're secure, there's no point falsifying things. It's you've got to tell the truth as you go through it. And if there are areas that you're not compliant, you've got to deal with that and make sure you are compliant.
Well, you'd just be tricking yourself, and
Yeah,
the best thing to do is abide by the spirit of the scheme and go through it like that. Because at the end of the day, it's there to protect your business. But what I was actually getting to was people they're not necessarily misleading, but they're misguided in their answer. So they believe they're putting down the correct answer as best they know it. But actually what we find is when we do the tests, their system, for whatever reason, is not actually working like that, or has not been set up like that. And that's where the plus level is actually very useful to tease out these sort of issues or non-compliances that no one knew were there, where something might have been set up incorrectly, but not through sort of neglect or anything. It's just fallen through the cracks as such. So that's where the plus level is actually very useful. And it's quite normal to detect non-compliances and issues at the plus stage, which are usually sometimes can be quite a surprise to the business owners or leaders.
We've got a couple of comments, and I think these come into some of the things you're saying anyway. So, like Steve Perez is saying, you need to reduce your attack footprint. So that's actually what the with Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus is talking about, isn't it? It's trying to limit the places where you could actually be attacked by making sure the configuration is correct, certain services that you not utilize are turned off, and actually protecting the environment. And what he's saying as well is it's by design it should be done that way as well. So when you start out from the beginning, but not everybody start from the beginning and designing a solution from the start. Most of them have got something in place and they're just trying to protect what they've already got. So there, and then finally is put in there about outbound unrestricted internet is one to not do. So a lot of people seem to think outbound's okay. It doesn't matter because the hackers are coming inbound. But actually, if you've got unrestricted internet access outbound as well, that can be an issue because it makes it easy for the attacker to exfiltrate data. They can send stuff out. They can create communications back to their command and control infrastructure quite easily if there's no restriction on that outbound internet as well. So thanks ever so much, Steve, for those comments.
Yeah, I've seen sort of DNS filtering and that outbound control work to really good effect, especially when we do work through some of the C+ testing scenarios where we're simulating certain payloads entering and being accessed by it through a device, and where that sort of outbound filtering is in place, it makes it very hard for that exploit to be followed through. So it can work to really good effect. And exactly as you said, Lee, that sort of secure configuration and reducing your threat footprint is integral part of the Cyber Essentials scheme. Don't have excessive numbers of user accounts that you don't require. Don't run applications or various software programs that you don't need, because everything you do that you don't need is just like bloatware, or it's increasing that threat landscape and making you a softer target. It's much easier to protect.
Yeah, we've had another comment from Steve because he's saying that I'd mentioned Log4j earlier about public facing things, and what Steve's saying is Log4j attacks. That's how it worked. It used that uncontrolled external access to the internet to actually then feed data back out afterwards. So, and that's very true.
Yeah, and like I said, all these things. If you apply the Cyber Essentials framework correctly, you can mitigate and control a lot of these areas that have been discussed, and we see that on a day-to-day basis. It's just doing it, it's applying it and aligning it to the businesses accurately, and so as not to constrain the operation of the business either. And the idea is a business to operate to make money. You don't want to be constraining that. It's that balance between operational capability and security. And in a perfect world, you lock everything in a concrete box 5 foot underground, and of course it's not going to be an issue. But you can't then run a business like that. So it's it's finding that balance, and that's quite key in this.
Yeah, and I think that's where things like good risk assessment up front. So looking at what your risks are, prioritizing those risks, and working on the things that really matter, and things that aren't quite so much of an issue that you can mitigate in another way. You do that way, but you actually, like you say, you make sure the business can function as well as it can, but also have a level of security that you need to protect customer accounts, especially if you're in the payment sector and you've got payment card information, making sure you're protecting all those as well.
Yeah, it's that balance, it's that risk balance approach. And this brings us nicely onto for example, the IASME governance piece. Now, IASME governance is an alternative to ISO 27001. It's an information security management system, and they're designed to do exactly what you've mentioned there, identify what's important to the business, i.e. the assets, be them physical or information, and attribute value to them. How much are they, what is their value to our business? How important are they to us? What would happen if we lost them, or they were taken from us, or distributed openly in the public domain? And then once you've got that data and you've got that knowledge there, you can then start thinking about, okay, well, how much do I need to invest to protect each of them? And you can proportion the right level of investment in accordance with the business still operating in a manner that's going to be efficient. So it's kind of like the next level, really, from the technical controls, in the sense that the technical controls that you'd engage with in the Cyber Essentials scheme are essential. They are important, and they would form one of the pillars that supports your overarching information governance system. I sometimes get questions or get statements directed in our way along the lines of, well, we've got 27001, so we don't need Cyber Essentials anymore. Obviously it trumps it. Well, no, it doesn't. It's actually a different. Cyber Essentials works very well hand in hand with ISO 27001 because it covers off that technical security aspect from a cyber perspective. And it can be a common misconception where people think that 27001 is different, it's just a better version, when it's not. And that's not helped by, sometimes you get these requirements in tenders or for frameworks where the requirement to jump on the framework is Cyber Essentials Plus or ISO 27001. Well, actually, what they should say is you need both, not one or together. The other, because they're different.
Yeah, because ISO 27000, there's a lot of people and process in it, but also in ISME governance, you're looking at people and process as well as the technical aspects of making it secure.
Absolutely, it covers pretty much the same areas. It's just the ISME governance scheme was developed to really focus on small to medium-sized enterprises and make that information security management system achievable and relevant to those small businesses. So it's got a little bit more flexibility, and it's not so heavy as looking at the sort of 27001. And IASME actually stands for Information Assurance for Small to Medium-Sized Enterprises. That's what the acronym stands for. So it's always been very focused on at that area. But we've run out the IASME governance process into quite large businesses as well. It's quite a good starting point for an organization that wants to adopt an information security management system, but doesn't quite want to jump into the 27001 piece straight away.
What about giving people an idea of time to achieve any of these? Because if somebody's looking to get a contract soon with a particular organisation, and they believe they need to have some kind of certification, so let's give us some ballpark figures and the amount of working days to go through Essentials Plus, and then maybe IASME governance, and the difference in time taken to do each one of them.
It's an interesting question, and it's a piece of string. It's down to how much.
Yeah, I'm sure it's quite variable depending on the organisation.
Yeah, so the Cyber Essentials basic level, if you've got all your information at hand, you're quite confident with the subject area that you're talking in, and if you encounter any non-conformities, you've got the ability in that organisation to make the changes quickly to comply with the standard. You could, in theory, you could get through that in a matter of within a day. It should be achievable. Now, typically companies will take longer than that because they encounter issues, or they don't have time, or they've got a day job to do, so they can only do half an hour each day on completing it. We can assist as a specialist company in this area by trying to take some of that strain off clients, and from that sort of expertise and sort of that sort of heavy lifting with regards to delivering that sort of standard. And sometimes in that scenario, it's interesting. We developed what we call our turnkey package, where we go into an organization, we really help them go through this process. And when we first did it, we were sort of picturing an organization that were quite sort of IT phobic. They weren't really sure about the technical subject area, and they needed somebody to come in with the knowledge. Whereas in reality, what we see with that particular package is we've helped companies that are extremely competent when it comes to IT, security, information governance, but they just don't have the resource or the capacity to be doing this 100% themselves. So they lean on a company like ours to help.
People are very time and resource scarce, aren't they, in most businesses? So having the time to do it and all the resources available to do it is a challenge.
Absolutely, and we've seen that work to really good effect, and it's let them get on with their sort of the current projects that they're running in their business, and we can come in and sort of help them along that in that way. So that's been quite interesting. Cyber Essentials Plus, from start to finish, it's not uncommon for us to get a company through within 1 to 2 weeks. We can bring that down to days if everyone is on point and they're making changes, and we get all the appointments booked in correctly, and so on and so forth. So again, it's extremely variable. We have had clients that drag these processes on for months and months because they have the priorities that come in, and suddenly it goes on the back burner, or they start struggling with something because they want to do it themselves. It's just out of their capacity, or it's out of their, they just don't have the resource to do it. So it's a very broad spectrum of time range there. However, IASB governance, that can typically take a little bit longer, because we're talking about policy and process, and it involves, if they've not got the policies already in place, it involves the creation and alignment of things like an information security policy and asset register and business continuity, disaster recovery plans, etc. And each of them can take quite a bit of time to create and align to the business and make sure it's installed correctly and actually being understood and used. So that can, we're talking, the higher end of the weeks going into months there. Like all these things though, if you're working on it 100% of the time and you're focused on it, we can bring that time right down to quite a rapid turnaround.
And it'd be interesting just to mention something. A lot of people talk about business continuity, and then there's on the cyber security side of things, we talk about incident management, and a lot of people seem to think they're the same thing, but actually they're completely different. So the business continuity plan is, if you lose any particular systems through a cybersecurity attack, how do you continue to work? How does your users continue to deal with customer requirements and continue to operate as a business? If it's taken your telephony system out, your email capability, whatever area of the business has been impacted by the actual attack, how can you continue to operate as a business? That's your business continuity plan. The actual incident management side is actually completely different. That's how do we deal with the incident? How do we make sure that everybody understands what's happening and we can deal with it as we go along, like we were talking about in the previous section on the actual threat landscape at the moment. So a lot of people tend to get those two mixed up, but they are quite different and they're quite important as well.
It goes one step further as well, Lee. It's not just, there's a default in UK industry specifically, IT security, cybersecurity, or security in general defaults to IT department. And it shouldn't really, because the IT bit is just one aspect, is the people, process, the policy, the leadership. It should sit really with an area, a function in the business that's got reach over the whole organization and can take responsibility for that piece. We see it very often where it's just delegated to the guy in the cupboard trying to manage the server, and it's the wrong place for it to sit. It needs to sit in the leadership team, in a central function, operations, compliance. We even see it sit quite well in the sort of the financial domains as well in organizations where they've got this great reach across the business, but also the right communication paths with the business leadership, where they can get the right budgets and they get the right attention and they can get the right actions being implemented.
Well, if you think about the issues with cybersecurity, there's three key impacts, isn't there? There's one is the technical impact, so what data you've lost, how you're going to recover it, and things. There's the money and the time to recover to get back to where you are. But the biggest impact is actually from a reputational perspective. You look at anybody who's impacted recently. We had Okta not so long ago, and they were trying to play that down, what happened to them. But we've had a number of others. I think it was yesterday we saw that the MOD have had an attack that's been effectively extracting data about people who've been recruited to join the army recently. So there's lots of these things happening, but it's more the reputational impact that's greater than the actual technical and the cost of recovery. So really the business need to be thinking about it, because it's the business that's impacted, not the IT team, is it? They may have got a bit of work to do for a little while, but it's the actual business is impacted, the owners or the chief exec and the CEO space, the CXO space up there is the key area.
Yeah, we see that an awful lot, and we also see technical departments struggling to try and implement things like information governance management systems, where they just don't have the reach or the sway at that leadership level to get things done, and they get everything right in their domain. And then as soon as you look outside of their domain into other areas of the business and say, do you understand what's happening in this area, that area? And it's just not there. They don't have the reach far and wide. It's just not.
Yeah, it's the key thing. It's a top-down approach, isn't it? It's got to come from the leadership and come down to all departments within the business. That security is something that everybody does. I think there was old adages we used to talk about everybody's in sales. So from the front desk through to the back office, everybody in the business is part of the sales team, because they're all communicating with customers at some point in their life. But actually, everybody's part of the security and the defense of the business as well, because they've all got to understand their part in it, be aware of any activity, but also to understand how important it is for the business as well.
You need somebody quite charismatic to be able to carry that message across the business. One of your major layers of defense is knowledge and training and awareness in the workforce. For people not to click on certain types of emails, for not to be giving details over the phone that they shouldn't be giving. It's nothing to do with technology. It's nothing to do with, the IT department. That's really, it's a cultural thing. It's a people thing. And it's something that, needs to be managed from that level. And I can't emphasize that enough.
Yeah. Right. Time-wise, we're shooting on, so we better move on to our next subject then. You were going to talk about stuff other than IASME. So are there any other options for people around security before we move on?
Yeah. So in addition to these, we offer clients a number of sort of audit type services. So if a company knows that they need to do something to improve their security, but they don't really know where to start, or they don't really know where they're actually sitting at the moment on a scale of 0 being bad and 10 being good, where are they? We deliver what we call holistic security audits, or sometimes focused security audits on a cyber domain, for example, where we'll come into an organization and we'll look at the organization from the top down in relation to security. And we'll just see what they're doing well, see areas that they can identify, any areas that they can improve, and then provide them with a good appraisal of where they are on that scale and how they can we essentially create a roadmap for them to improve their security, which gives them focus, and it gives them an ability to take some sort of direction and do something proactive about it. Because it's sometimes when you're in a bad place, you don't really know where to turn, you don't really know where to start. But it's a great starting point on that journey, and a good sort of measure periodically to see how things are going. The threats change.
I would assume physical security is included in that, because we've been talking about cybersecurity at the moment, but physical security is quite important as well.
Absolutely. We look at technical security, physical security, cybersecurity, information security, personnel security, all aspects, because human nature to take the path of least resistance, and that's the same for the would-be adversaries. So they, you can have the best cybersecurity in the world, but if you leave all the windows open every night, guess which way the attack's going to come in. It's so you've got I always say a nice consistent base level across every area is better than loads in one area and not a lot in another area. So it's that sort, and that's where we coined the term holistic. It's just the whole piece. And it's quite interesting to see where some companies fall down in that area and do great in other areas. And sometimes it's an eye opener for them as well. And that's the whole idea of the audit. Blow the cobwebs out, work out where we stand at the moment, and come up with a plan of how we can get on the right track and get it sorted. Yeah.
Okay, right. So let's move on to the next piece. This is about the difference between passive and active. So not sure who's watching at the moment and which approach you've got at the moment, but I'm just going to go through a couple of things and the different components of them and explain what's different about them. And then if you've got time at the end, we might talk about SIEM as well, because it all fits into this. But starting out, endpoint protection is what people are commonly doing. It's a passive approach. It's where people have got some kind of antivirus technology and some kind of personal firewall on an endpoint. That endpoint could be a desktop or laptop running Windows, a Mac-based system, or it could be a server, either physically in a data center, virtually in a data center, or it could be in a cloud service. So whatever it is, it's an endpoint in this term, and it's got some basic protection because you're effectively identifying if there's some kind of malware dropped on that machine in some respect, whether it's coming through email or whether it's been downloaded. And you've got this personal firewall to break, block people coming in from the outside world onto the system through to things like remote desktop and other remote comm services that might be available on that system. So that's endpoint protection. And I like to use the terminology of having great locks on your house. So locks on the windows, locks on the doors, you're stopping people getting in. But the trouble being is sometimes people get in without coming through the door or window, especially from a cyber security perspective. Because if they've stole your credentials, they can come in legitimately as if they're you. If they've found an exploit in an application or operating system, they can get in without having to unlock any of the doors or break any of the windows to get there. So that's the difference with this. And the next thing is endpoint detect and response, so EDR. So these tools are quite different because they've got that same protection layer like the good locks, but what they're also doing is monitoring to understand what's happening around them. And it's a bit like having CCTV, so you can see the threat coming to the property, and having sensors inside to see movement and actions internally, so they've actually got in. And you're looking at behavioral patterns, specific types of execution, communications, inbound and outbound, so we can actually see it. And one of the technologies we utilize is Sentinel One, which have got an EDR and XDR platform that works really well in these environments. But the R side of it is the blue light special that turns up to your house. Well, not these days, but in the past, it would have turned up your house within a couple of minutes of the alarm going off and dealing with it, and have got that specialist security capabilities to deal with the problem. So that comes into the next one, which is a SOC team. So we're talking about small businesses at the moment. Most small businesses don't have a SOC. They don't have a security operations center where there's specific security technicians, analysts who understand security and can deal with an issue. And that's what the problem is with this space. If you're in a large enterprise that got 10, 20,000 employees, you'll have your own SOC team. There'll be guys there that specialize in security. They've got all the technical capabilities. They've got all of the alerting capabilities, so they can deal with an issue straight away. But in that space of 200 below, or even 2,000 and below, in a lot of cases, there's no one who can actually deal with it. So a SOC team is really important. So what you get normally with an EDR type solution is SOC pit team as well. So that blue light special turning up to deal with it. So that soon as a detect is made, automation kicks in to start with. So to try and quarantine the activity, whatever that activity is, whether it's a network communication, whether it's execution of a particular piece of code, if whatever type of behavioral things happening, stop it. So quarantine it to stop it happening. Next thing, try and kill it. So if it's a process that's running, and it all depends on where they are in the attacks framework, and I'll talk about that in a second. But try and stop it and try and effectively put the fire out, extinguish it at that point in time. Next thing is the SOC team would be alerted on that, and the first thing they're going to do is do some analytics to understand what happened. How did the attacker get in? Did they drop some malware in through some kind of drive-by? So somebody's been to a particular website, it's been compromised, and it's dropped some malware. Have they clicked on a link that was sent through some kind of hijacked email thread, and they believed it was actually from Pete Rosinski, and it wasn't actually from him, and they've clicked and downloaded it? Was it some kind of operating system or application vulnerability? How did it happen? Because without understanding that, you can't improve the security going forward. And it's a cyclic thing. Like many things that we do these days, it's cyclic. We've got to take this approach that we always ever improving. So without that understanding, we can't improve things. The next thing is response, and then it's recovery. So response is making sure it's shut down. A SOC engineer going on within a few minutes of the attack, having a look what's happened, making sure the automation's killed it, if not, dealing with at that point in time. But then recovery, so getting you back to where you were just before the attack, because we want to have little data loss on the system, whether that's a server infrastructure instance, or whether it's somebody's end user desktop. We want to make sure we minimize any loss of information or data. So getting back to just before the attack and recovering at that point in time, but making it as seamless as possible. So they're the key things about it. But incident management does come into this in a big way, because having to handle that incident and do the communications across the business, like Pete was saying before, is really important. We need to all understand what's happening, and we need to maybe deal with other third parties as well. If we've got XML links, so data links into other businesses, we need to make sure that they've not been compromised. If we've got virtual private network links to other business, we've got to make sure that those not been compromised and the attacks moved across into another business. So communications is key, because they're not going to be keen on you being a partner going forward if you've been compromised, you've not let them know, and the hacker has actually got into their systems via you. You became the soft underbelly to attack, and they've used that as a conduit to get into another business. So they're not going to be very pleased about it. But again, incident management is really critical, that communications are done throughout the business. Everybody understands what's happening, and we deal with it to the end, and we also do a drains up at the end and look at what the situation was and see what we can learn for next time. But it's really key that we understand what stage an attack is, and that's where EDR products come into their own, because they actually map against the MITRE framework. So we can see what stage they're in. Are they at that initial access stage? Are they moved on? They're executing code. Are they got towards the end and they're actually collecting data? What stage are they in? Because sometimes there's a bit of dwell time. Some organizations have had 6 months dwell time before people have realized that there's an issue. In fact, some organizations only find out they've actually had an attack and been breached when their data is seen actually in the wild, which is quite scary. And some of these companies are security businesses, and that's how they've actually identified it. So you look at back some of the SolarWinds and FireEye issues that were about 18 months, 2 years ago. It was when the data was in the wild that people started to see it, that they knew there'd been a compromise in the first place. I think it was similar with Sony with some of the games and films that were stolen from them. It was only because they were available in the wild that people knew they'd been hacked. Sony themselves didn't really know it had happened. They'd got this dwell. So from the compromise to when they knew about it was quite a long time. And commonly these days we're seeing 6 months dwell time as on average, because people don't have these EDR tools in place to be able to identify and detect that there is an attack ongoing, be able to understand where they are from a micro attack perspective and deal with it. So they're the main difference between passive and active. So we're actually going to do something. We're going to detect it. We're going to respond to it. We're going to get a person involved. We're going to do some analytics. We're going to make sure that it's fixed, and we're going to roll that information back into our protection framework, so we ensure that we're better protected next time, so even it doesn't even get to that point. So that they're the critical difference between passive and active. What we're seeing is some organizations, such as insurance companies that offer cyber security cover, are starting to say that they actually want to see people move into EDR instead of EPP type services. So they're looking for this, and that's the critical piece, is that detect piece, and having a SOC service that can actually respond to it, and what's we're seeing. Any thoughts on that, Pete?
It's an interesting subject of insurance. I think there's definitely a lot more of a focus on it now, and insurance companies are definitely becoming wiser to not insuring high risks. The solution is not just to get insurance. You should try and do some self-help and protection, possibly, and have insurance as well. If you've got the thoughts of I'm just going to take insurance and they'll cover the problem, it won't. It's very hard to recover from an incident, an event, and without the right measures in place up front, we will come off worse. They'll never recompense you completely. So prevention is much better than cure.
Yeah, and I think, coming back to what we were talking about earlier, the cost that you get from the insurance company might help you cover some of the costs for recovery, but they're not going to cover your reputational impact at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's going to be so difficult to measure, and it could also last for a very long time. You look at what happened with TalkTalk and a few other people that had big losses some time ago, many years ago. Their business has really struggled, with customers for a while. It's taken them a long time to build back afterwards because of the reputational impact that they had from these kind of data losses and compromises.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think we're coming up to the end of our time. So if anybody's got any questions at all, I know we had a couple of statements from Steve Perez, but if anybody's got any particular questions for myself and Pete, just drop them into the comments if you're on LinkedIn, or in the Q&A or the chat if you're on the Hopping side. If there's anything that we can clear up, anything we've talked about that you want to know more information about, or did we say something that wasn't quite clear enough, just let me know. I'll keep looking over, because I've got the Hopping set up on another laptop to the side, because I can't run the two at the same time. So I'm keeping an eye on over there. So if anybody's actually got any questions or anything about what we've covered, just let us know now. As we're not getting much in at the moment, I think we must have done a great job telling people everything there, Pete. Must be. Have you got any final comments or any final thoughts for today?
No, other than, like I just said a few minutes ago, if you think you need to do something, act on it. Put some sort of measures in place. The prevention, any efforts put into prevention are much better spent than some sort of reaction after an event. There's some really good, some quite, well, not funny, but they're very strong images you go and see on social media of the glass with a few coins in it, the budget for security before an incident, and the glass overflowing the budget after an incident. And try not to fit into that category, really, because it would be painful.
Yeah, and just there's some stats though. From the 2021 to 2021, so last year, 39% of small business had some kind of attack or breach during that period of time, which is quite high. Also, people that responded to a survey, 77% of them said it was a really high, priority for them to improve their cybersecurity. But there's a lot of people say these things, but like you say, unless they act on them and do something about it, it's not going to change, is it? They're still going to get attacked. They're going to still get breached. They're going to have the impact of, our systems not being available, reputational and also financial impact.
Yeah, it's always better to do it on your terms. A lot of companies that engage with us to do their certifications, Cyber Essentials, for example, typically do it because one of their clients has asked them to do it, or they're getting onto a tender process that requires it. So they're doing it through necessity. If you do it on your own terms, when you're ready in your own time frame, it's a much more straightforward process. You can do it in a more controlled manner, and you can do it with a lower budget, essentially.
Yeah. Well, we've run out of time now. We're down to our last minute. So thanks ever so much for joining me today, Pete. Really good. Anybody, if you've got any questions, if you're watching this recorded, place them into the comments later on LinkedIn. If you're looking at the YouTube recording later, drop them in there. Any comments you've got, and we'll respond to those and come back to you. If it's something that's on Pete's side, I'll make sure we've got a response from Pete. If it's from my side, I'll get you a response from that side as well. So thanks ever so much for joining us today. And or if you're joining us later because you're watching the recorded version, thanks for watching it as well. But like I say, anything we can do to help, just let us know. If you do need to contact us, both Pete and I are on LinkedIn. You can contact us through LinkedIn. You can also go to the Assure Technical website or the Tactile Technology website, or emails, lee.cassidy@tactiletechnology.com. And are you Peter.Rosinski at assuretechnical.co.uk?
Yeah, well, Pete@assuretechnical.com. Yeah.
Okay, so Pete@assuretechnical.com. I should have put some banners together for the end of this to put that, but I missed that thought just thinking about the content instead, because it was all about the content for me today. It was making sure that people are aware of the threat landscape, what they can do around certification, and also knowing the difference between passive and active protection. They were the most important thing from my perspective. So again, thanks ever so much for joining me today. We'll shut things down now, but like I say, anybody who's watching this, if you've got any questions or anything, stick them in the comments, and we'll answer them as quickly as possible. As it's, if it's in the LinkedIn, it might not be that quick. It might take us an hour or two to get to them, especially if it's the middle of the night. It'd definitely take a few hours to get to them, but drop us anything you need in there. So thanks ever so much. If you want to hang around, Pete, afterwards, we'll just have a quick chat about how things have gone, and then we'll move on. Thanks a lot.
Goodbye.